What's up, Badger fans? And you can tell probably by the facial expression, I'm excited to talk about this one. We got Thomas Heiberger. We are talking about continuing to go through the 2024 class, player by player, break them down, three things we like, watch some film, get the experts back on. Today's episode is on Thomas Heiberger, outside linebacker, Jefferson, South Dakota, 6'4", 220, 225 pounds. A four-star player on 247, four-star on three. Rivals, three-star, ESPN, three-star. I the more this from when he started, I don't know if there's a prospect from when they committed to right now that I've gotten more excited about than Thomas Heiberger in this class. He's so athletic, and I've talked about him a lot on recent shows. So like I don't want to repeat everything I'm saying and create boredom among people, but it bears repeating. He is an athletic freak show. Like he is fought. So if you here's one thing I used to do. I had a website. It was called Project Bucky. I might bring it back out at some point. But I ranked players on like just physical attributes. Right. You would get a 3-star, 4-star, 5-star ranking on just your physical attributes because not it, technique matters, offer list matters, film matters, but just like on how athletically dominant you could be. Heiberger's a 5-star on that matrix. Right? People need to understand how ridiculously athletic this kid is. Right? He had a 39-inch vertical. I talked to his coach. His coach had a 40-inch vertical. If you go look at, I looked at the 2022 NBA Combine. That would be fourth in the NBA Combine that year. That vertical leap. And people may say, well, what does that mean? How does that translate? Like we're not recruiting a basketball player here. Vertical leap, that power and explosion, it's directly related to athletic ability, quickness, quick acceleration, agility. Like it is an explosive metric that kind of shows the ability of an athlete to explode in space, to accelerate in space. That's an elite vertical for an NBA prospect. What does that do as a linebacker? Well, it gives you more explosion. Those quick twitch muscles that help power your vertical jump also power your first step. Gives you acceleration and explosion off the jump. Gets you on the edge of tackles. Explodes through ball carriers. By the way, also a 40, 39, 38-inch vertical with a 6'4" frame and that huge wingspan that clogs up all sorts of passing lanes. Right? You imagine him getting blocked off, walled off by a Big Ten offensive tackle and then getting that 40-inch vertical with that 6'4" frame in a passing lane. He's going to bat down 10 passes by the time his Badger career is over. He's going to get in a zone and just create more havoc because instead of a 6'2", 6'3" linebacker with a typical vertical jump, you have a 6'4" linebacker with a much bigger vertical presence. Like that closes down passing lanes. It makes it harder to fit the ball over him. When quarterbacks try to feather that pass over the linebacker in front of the safety, it's harder when you got a guy like Thomas Heiberger out there, right? Who can shut down some of those touch passes. So I I mean, I've talked about it. Like this is one of my favorite prospects in this class. I think athletically, he has the upside to be one of the best players in this class, period. Now, will it come together? You never know. I've talked about that with several prospects. It doesn't always work out in recruiting, but from a physical standpoint, like his upside is almost unrivaled in this class. And it just is what it is. So we talked about the three things on every prospect that we like. The first one I've already talked about. It's the athletic measurables. These are NFL athletic measurables. Period. These are Alabama, Georgia, Texas, Oklahoma, USC, Florida, LSU athletic measurables in an outside linebacker. The second thing I like, he has the ability to do a lot of different things on a football field, right? I like the versatility. You talk about. I think there's several players in this class that have that. Raphael Dunn. There's a couple players that in on the staff, Amari Snowden, like guys that this staff has done a good job of bringing in players who I think are versatile and can play several different spots. Like I think Heiberger can be a guy who can rush the passer. I think he can also help set the edge. I think he can drop back in coverage. I think he's a versatile player, and that versatility works really well in the 3-3-5, right? It works really well in the defense that Mike Tressel wants to run. So I think from that standpoint, he's more of a fit to where they want to go. He's a little bit different than what they've had. So I really like that aspect about him. And then the last thing that I'm like, I was able to talk to his head coach. I was able to talk to him. I just like the way he's wired. I like the way his head coach talked about him. Both of them came off really well. I think he has the right type of intangibles, the right type of mindset to succeed in the Big Ten. He's excited to be there. I'm kind of over the moon with this prospect, man. He's one of I had him in my top 10 on the community rank. I was one of the highest on that group. And by the way, I think the community has kind of come around on him as well because he was one of the players that was ranked most consistently in our community top 10 prospect list. I just think the upside is too hard to ignore. The tools are too hard to ignore. And yeah, I'm really excited to see what he becomes in Madison. Let's put the film on. Let's watch some film with Thomas Heiberger, and let's see some of those athletic tools and measurements. Here you see him coming off the edge, just overpowers the offensive tackle or tight end right there. Now, it is worth noting, South Dakota is not the greatest level of high school competition. Oh man, that quarterback just died. RIP. So he does have to. He's going to have a step up in competition. That's going to be a little higher relative to a guy coming out of Texas, coming out of Florida, coming out of California. Right, some of these places we've talked about. Xavier Lucas, the type of competition he's played. That's not the competition, that Thomas Heiberger has played. But the athletic tools still, they are what they are, right? Those athletic tools. And by the way, that might be a good thing. That might be a good thing, y'all. As he comes off the edge here, breaks down, tackles the quarterback in space. Because if he had been a guy in Florida, California, Texas with these athletic tools, I don't know if you're getting him. That's a guy that's a 4-star. This is a guy that's a 4-star if he's in Florida. I'm convinced of that. He had a kind of a weird recruitment because he was a baseball guy. Then he played quarterback originally. Then he transferred schools. This is a guy, if he had just played outside linebacker in Texas, he's a 4-star, and he's probably going to Oklahoma or Texas or somewhere else. So maybe it's a good thing he's in South Dakota and he remained a little hidden. Again, you see him a lot near the line of scrimmage. That's something he talked about. He likes playing near the line of scrimmage, and I think he has that type of ability. But I think he can also be a guy that drops back in coverage and disrupts some stuff from a passing standpoint. Let's watch a couple more clips here. He can come off the edge, run defense. I mean, he's just a physical athlete. Coming on a blitz. He's a guy, too, that you're going to have trouble. You're going to have trouble if you're an offensive lineman seeing Thomas Heiberger when he puts 10 more pounds on this frame coming downhill. He has that type of physicality. Here he's playing offense, showing the hands, the athleticism. I always talk about players I really like seeing play both ways. I think that just shows kind of a competitiveness and an intangible that's unique and special. All right, we're going to wrap it there. Kick it over to the recruiting experts. Both John Garcia and Brian Smith talk about Thomas Heiberger. Again, one of my favorites in the class. I think rare athletic measurables and upside.
Start here. I want to start with Thomas Heiberger, 6'4", 220-ish pound linebacker out of Sioux Falls. Big athletic kid. What did you like about, or what did you see about his game when you watched him on film?
Yeah, obviously works primarily as a pass rusher there in South Dakota. And why not, right? 6'4", athletic, over 215 pounds or so. You understand why in high school they're like, hey, let's get after the passer and be productive there, which he very much is. I was really impressed with the football IQ, the hands, the technique that he plays with. I think there's a lot of natural ability. He's strong off the line. When he does move to linebacker, the read and reaction skills are really strong when he does play off the ball or even as a stand-up player there on the edge. But that combination of awareness and IQ and understanding of where he's supposed to be is really solid. It's kind of clinical out there. He attacks the outside shoulder of the offensive tackle and then works from there. If he beats him with speed, he wins. If not, he counters with great hands and lateral ability. So I think there's a lot to like about the pass rushing ability and the floor there athletically with his football IQ attached to it. We don't get as many samples of him working off the ball, but that looks productive as well. Whether he works outside in, even drops into coverage a little bit with some success, I do think there's some potential 3-down ability, just depending on where Wisconsin wants this kid. I think he's got the frame to where you could bulk him up and say, hey, rush the passer permanently at 240 pounds, or you could push him off the football and allow him to be an extension of your defensive line, help to set the edge as a second-level player. I could see that in his wheelhouse down the line as well. But he's got physically some blank slate to work with, but in between the lines on Friday nights, there's a high floor here with what he does well today.
Yeah, one of the great stories I heard with Thomas is Texas A&M is one of the schools that offered him. He's kind of blown up recently.
Yeah,
they said, we got your metrics, your athletic testing numbers. Just can you film yourself doing that so we can verify? He's an outside linebacker, has a 39-inch vertical, 4'6", 40. With some of the testing numbers that he has here. When we talk about athletic measurables per position, right, I think we have a good feel. Receivers, we want them running a 4.3, 4.4, right? What about a linebacker running a 4.6 with almost a 40-inch vertical with that frame?
Yeah, with that frame, that's the key part. I think if this was a 6 foot, 220-pound downhill type of player, you're happy with it for sure. But it just means a little bit more when you look at 6'4", 215 on there with these numbers. You say, oh, and now it becomes very noteworthy because you can utilize him as a true speed edge rusher or keep him there at the second level. He is fast enough, clearly, and explosive enough, which is the measure of that vertical jump, to where he can absolutely play almost anywhere on the edge in the front seven. First level, second level, he could play off the football if you need him to, and you should feel comfortable there. And we get samples of all of that on Friday nights, which is just as important, if not more important. So I just think he creates a blank slateness to him to where his body can develop in one of two ways, and you're kind of okay with it in either way. If he's a full-time pass rusher or a true off-the-ball player, you're fine with it there, because if you think of the modern game and what you have to combat, the offensive tackles are getting longer and smaller, right? So they're built to combat the Thomas Heibergers of the world. And then you look at the second level, running backs are getting more fluid. These tight ends are getting freakier, right? We talk about it all the time on this show. This is the type of player that could potentially help you combat some of that, whether it's with his physicality at the line of scrimmage or even running underneath and presenting a smaller target window for the quarterback. So I think there's a lot to work with here, depending on how Wisconsin views him when he does get there for good. But of course, he's got another year to bulk up, or whatever his body's going to do that will present itself a year from now. And I think Wisconsin could even tweak the evaluation at that point. But it's a good problem to have when you're bigger and more athletic than most.
Let's talk about that bigger, more athletic than most. That's not a huge football recruiting hotbed,
Sure.
South Dakota. What type of competition is he playing there, and who are the type of schools that would go in? Is that typically like a Nebraska, Iowa? Who goes into South Dakota typically there?
Yeah, typically it's that part of Big Ten country that goes in for the upper echelon. We've seen obviously the Dakotas prelude well to the FCS level with the Bison up there and their crazy run of championships. But every now and again, we get something different, and I think that's what Thomas has been able to present himself as, because he is a unique athlete on top of it. Just like Lincoln Kienholz last cycle, when you bring uniqueness and overall athleticism to this physically dominant Friday night player, it pushes you beyond that conventional geographical footprint from a recruiting standpoint. So you do get the SEC involved. Some of the Big 12 gets involved a little bit more, and it becomes a little bit more national of a recruitment. And that's what we started to see here with Thomas as well, with that great example you threw in there about A&M. So, typically not a hotbed, and he's dominating competition that he probably should dominate, but he is, and that's always been my deal with small school guys. Derrick Henry played on the border of Florida, Georgia, in a tiny town, 1A football, but he kicked their ass every time, So it's like all he did was set the new rushing record in the history of high school football. So if you're going to be the biggest, freakiest guy, it should look like it on Friday nights. And we get a lot of that with Thomas Heiberger, again, whether he's rushing the passer or not.
What's going on, Badger fans? Welcome to another episode of Locked On Badgers. Really excited about this. So, and we have Thomas Heiberger's high school coach coming on to break down his film, talk about what makes him so special. We're going to get into all of that on today's Locked On Badgers on Wisconsin, and let's go.
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what is going on, Badger fans? Welcome to Locked On Badgers, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Herrings. We're not wasting any time here. We're going to bring Coach Benedetto on, coming in, Thomas Heiberger's head coach. Coach, thank you so much for jumping into the show. Really, really do appreciate it, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Excited to talk about Tommy and talk about the Badgers.
This is one of the prospects that we talked a little bit before the show that Badger fans are really excited about, just because physically we've heard about the explosiveness, the ability. Are those stories true? Is he indeed an athletic unicorn?
Yeah, Tommy moves and bends and jumps and runs really, really well. He's a 40-inch vertical. We tested him in the spring in the weight room. His weight room numbers as far as like clean and bench and squat are out the roof. And he did track for the first time this year too. And for learning to come out of the blocks for the first time, he did really well and had some good times in the 100 and 200.
When did you know that he was different? When did you first see him?
So this is only our third year as a high school. So Tommy went to a different high school as a freshman, and then our new high school got built. And we saw our kids for the first time in June when we started lifting. And he's this tall, 6'4", skinny kid. But you saw how he squatted and how he bent. And then you saw him on the field and how he ran. It was like, all right, this kid's got a chance to be a pretty good college football prospect. I would say his sophomore year, he probably was just a really good athlete playing linebacker. It was his first year playing defense as a sophomore. He started for us. But then last year he improved on his technique, is super coachable, and he turned into a really, really good football player last year.
Talk about that aspect of it, because there's a lot of athletes who never develop technique, who aren't coachable. Where does that come from with you say Tommy? That's awesome. Where does that come from with Tommy?
I think it's just kind of in his DNA. His dad played baseball in college. He's got a really great family. So he takes guidance and he takes coaching really well. Like, here's an example for you. We're playing, I think it was our first week of the season, and Tommy rushed the passer and just went for a sack. And our defensive coordinator kind of gave him a hard time, like, you got to strip the ball, Tommy. So he's working that with our D-line coach all week. Sure enough, next week we get a strip sack, fumble for a touchdown. So it just takes 1 week for him to apply the coaching, and I think that's what makes him special too. He's just a super good kid, and very, very coachable.
How does it feel as a coach to be working with a kid on something, to be putting those reps in practice, and then the next week you see it come to fruition?
Yeah, it's awesome. That's why we coach, right? You want to see progress and kids get better every day. And I think he's a great example for our team. I think it's going to do him a lot of good when he gets to college. He's going to go to Wisconsin and be on scout team and get plowed in the ground by a 6'7", 330-pound lineman. But he's going to learn from it, and he's going to get better from it. And I think that's why I think he's going to have a successful college career.
So I'm going to have you put kind of your coach hat on here for a second. What kind of defense do you guys run? And then how do you guys use Tommy in that scheme?
Yeah, so we run a 3-3-5 stack. We see a lot of spread teams, and we feel like that takes away the run when teams are in 10 personnel. And we have the ability to play zone and man and different things like that. In our base defense, Tommy's our Sam linebacker, so he's to the strong side in the stack. But last year we messed around with putting him down at defensive end, and he obviously had a lot of success doing that. But he's the strong side guy. The run's coming at him most of the time, and he's really, really developed seeing the offensive line, reading the down blocks, reading the kickouts, and being explosive down and shutting down the run.
I love it. All right, let's talk about that player that's hard to evaluate. Thomas Heiberger, committed a while ago, but he's coming on an official visit June 9th. I wanted to get your thoughts on this player, because he's really intriguing to me. On one hand, he has a massive frame, right, as an edge linebacker, 6'4", 220-ish, but coming out of South Dakota, not a lot of competition, as you've mentioned, really good testing numbers, offers from Oklahoma, Vanderbilt, Purdue, Nebraska, among others. What did you see when you put on his film?
Technique, effort, and length. Those are good combinations. Heiberger plays against competition that's not good. That's just reality. If he played down here where I'm at, though, in Florida, that's like the true measurement. This state produces as high a rate for defensive Power 5 players there is in the country, and he could still fit in. I can just tell that from being down here for a number of years. That's the biggest thing. Wisconsin doesn't get enough kids like this with a high floor to rush the passer. Well, even Georgia needs more. I mean, you can never have enough, because they burn a lot of calories and a lot of energy just on a couple plays. You got to rotate guys. If Wisconsin's going to beat Ohio State, how do you do it? Slow down their passing game. You got to have better corners. You got to have better pass rushers. This guy fits that bill. And I also think he could play linebacker, like in a traditional sense. 1985 Big Ten, he could have fit in and been a will linebacker or something. But with his length and his ability to come off the edge with his really good technique already for a high school kid. Somebody's coached him. I don't know who it is. I think he can play pretty early for Wisconsin. This is a kid nobody's going to talk about, though, because of where he's from.
Where do you see him in 2 or 3 years? Because there was some thought he's going to be able to put on quite a bit of weight with his frame and maybe play with his hand in the dirt. And then there's still some thought he's more of an in the space guy because he flashes. He had some athletic testing numbers that are just off the charts. A high 30-inch vertical, explosive numbers.
I think it depends on the down and distance. If you look at Fickell and what he did at Cincinnati, they played multiple defenses. Not just fronts, but like literally multiple defenses. 3-3-5, did some stack stuff, did some 4-3. He will move around. He did that for his high school team this last year at Jefferson in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Why wouldn't you do it at the next level? Because whoever's coached him again has done a good job. He's a capable kid. Don't make it easy for the opposition to say, okay, it's 3rd and 1. We know where he's going to be. Make it difficult. That's why a lot of these teams are using multiple fronts and different things, and Fickell kind of takes it to another level. Make it hard for the other team to beat up on your best players or double them, go away from them. I think you'll see him play linebacker when they're in a 3-man front sometimes, but he'll also be a stand-up edge. And in a 4-man line, he'll have his hand in the dirt. Makes it really hard to prepare for him.
Well, that feels like an extension of our conversation with Vernon Woodward, right? Like a player you can move around, just a chess piece. And to take that a step further, I know we were talking about cornerback before, but you're also, again, betting on upside frame. You're taking someone in who has a lot of the measurables that the Georgias and the Ohio States look for, but you went to a place that maybe is a little harder to evaluate. Again, you're finding the measurables in places, whether it's technique you got to coach up or geography to match up with the powerhouse programs in a way.
Yeah, you have to trust your own gut. Somehow this kid ended up at one of their camps or one of their coaches called, whatever it is. But you're not setting up your visit schedule for the month of May, like when you get into March and say, well, this coach is going to South Dakota. We got to really recruit South. You know what I mean? That's not how it works. Somebody got him involved. And it's interesting. 24/7 doesn't even have him as the number 1 rated player in South Dakota. I'm curious who number 1 is, but he's a really good player. And again, he could fit in Florida. That's the only measurement that I need because we have more defensive players than anybody, and he would be just fine here. To give a last-second piece for him, he reminds me of what Venables used to recruit when he was at Clemson. They took kids like this. They could play some linebacker, move them around a little bit, but they ended up being edge guys or they were really good blitzers, kind of had a knack for finding the gap. That's what he reminds me of. And I maybe Heiberger won't be a superstar. I don't know because he could get too big maybe, but I think he's going to be a true pass rusher. He'll be 245, 250 and be a pure pass rusher. And you could never have enough of those guys.
I want to go under the hood just a little bit more here. You mentioned you could tell he's been coached really well. Somebody got to him early. What do you mean by that?
Some of the angles that he takes, like even in his stance, how he sets up his first step off the line of scrimmage, it's a little more advanced. Some of my buddies in Tampa run a company called Trench Academy. They coach even some of the Buccaneers. Okay, you don't get to coach professional guys unless you're good. And I've seen them for years and how they do it. And he fits a lot of the things that are going on there. And he will mix his moves from play to play. Some guys have a really good swim move or they have a really good dip move, whatever. He does different things and he will mix them up one to set up the next. He's a smart kid. So he's been coached, he's taken to it, and he's beaten a lot of guys really bad in the state of South Dakota.